I think we're live just about now, but I'm going to click out of some things once we go live and also plug this YouTube link to my yeah, we definitely are. Hold on 1 second. We're definitely live now, sir. Let me
Okay.
see. Hold up 1 second. See, I want to get back to the screen where I can see you. Ah, where are you? There you go. Hold up. So I can, no, no. Okay. All these, there we go. Now I just want to put the link to my Facebook so people know that I'm live if there's any more watchers. And they can watch it later. There we go. Post. Yeah. So anyway, so we're live.
Good.
Live and direct from Norway. This is the first, this is the first interview I conducted in the same time zone on my
Okay.
YouTube channel.
Good.
So are you also in he's in I believe in Oslo, Norway as well, correct?
I'm in Oslo, yes.
Yeah. So we both are in Oslo. Like I said, this is the first interview I conducted in the same time zone.
Mhm.
Uh, I've interviewed several people from the U.S., Japan, and people that live in Japan and all over, Israel as well. And you are the first, and the first, I believe, ethnic Norse person that I'm interviewing
Okay.
today.
All right.
I'm an African American. Been living in Norway since 2012.
Okay. So,
And so my interest has always been,
so you speak Norwegian?
that's a trick question. No, some,
Some.
some,
Good.
some. I think you know how it goes. You guys speak so good. Yeah, so well when it comes to the English language that yeah, we kind of tend to, forget about speaking or yeah, get lazy,
Yeah.
as you say. But yeah, not some, and I'm getting better. Um, Yeah. So, and what area of Norway are you actually from? Are you from Oslo
I'm
or?
from Oslo. Yes, I was born.
Okay.
I was born here in
Okay.
1943.
1943. Okay, I'm put up the volume. Man, it's there we go. Now I can hear you real well. We had a little bit of technical difficulties in the beginning. I'm gonna make sure that this is up to par. This should be all the way. Okay. And you were born in what year, sir? You said
1943,
1943. Okay.
during the war.
And okay.
Hmm.
Okay. Wow. Wow. And the reason why I have Helge Rønning, am I saying it correctly?
It's fine.
Right. Helge Rønning is in the building, everybody. And the reason why I have him here is because he had a meeting with Stokely Carmichael, otherwise known as Kwame Ture, in I believe 1969.
No, it was earlier. It was in 67, I think.
In 67. Okay. Okay. And like I,
It was definitely in 67 because in 69 I was not in Norway. Then I was in UK in London.
okay. And I know in 68 they said that he was like in Africa and Ghana
Yeah, yeah.
and yeah, Guinea or whatnot. Yeah. So yeah, did you have any other interviews about your meeting with Stokely Carmichael?
No, not really. I wrote about it once many years ago
Wow.
after in Norwegian in a Norwegian newspaper or
Okay.
magazine. I don't know whether I have it any longer, the article.
Right, right, right.
And the reason for my meeting with him here in Norway was that I was organizing a meeting with him and some of the other people from SNCC at the time, because I had been studying in the United States from in 64 and 65.
And for the people that don't know the term SNCC, that stands for
That-
Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
exactly.
That Stokely Carmichael was a leader. Yeah. Oh, just to let
What
the
he was,
followers
yeah.
know. Yeah, yeah.
Together with many other very well-known people who just recently passed away, like Bob Moses, for instance.
Mm, mm, mhm, mhm, mhm. Now, So yeah, he was. So obviously he didn't transition to the Black Panther Party when you met him. He was still part of SNCC.
He was still part of SNCC, yes.
Okay. Wow, that was pretty early. And did you meet him in Oslo or Norway, or was it in
No,
UK or?
I met him actually. What happened was that because when I studied in the United States, I had lots of contacts with people in SNCC and also with others in the civil rights movement then. And then at the time, Stokely Carmichael had been at a conference in London, which was organized at a roundhouse, which was called something Liberation, and together also with one of my professors at Brandeis University, where I was studying, namely Herbert Marcuse. And then he was traveling around Europe, and I was one of the student leaders at University of Oslo then, before I went to study at School of Oriental and African Studies in London. So we invited Stokely Carmichael, and he came with a few of his friends and colleagues and comrades here, and we had a big meeting with him in Oslo. Where
What year was that? You remember?
That must have been 67.
Okay. Yeah. And that was with Cleaver as well, right? Wasn't it Cleaver?
Yeah, but he was not part of that group.
Part of that group. That's right. Yeah.
That was, I think they sort of joined the Black Panther Party afterwards. I mean,
right.
And Stokely Carmichael at the time, there was this split in SNCC in 67, I think, about the more radical
right.
part of SNCC, which said they were going to pick up guns, and non-violent part of SNCC. And that's partly one of the reasons why there was this split between Bob Moses and Stokely Carmichael, among others. And he came here to talk about the situation in Black America.
Right.
And it was a very extremely well attended meeting, and it was,
that's what I was going to ask you. I was wondering the atmosphere.
It was incredible atmosphere. There were 1,300 people present at the main campus of the university at Blindern, and lots of interest in what was happening. It was very well reported in the press.
Right.
And there had been an incident in Sweden before he came, because he had been at a meeting, or he should have been at a meeting in Uppsala, in one of the two traditional student towns in Sweden. That meeting was cancelled, but biggest tabloid newspaper in Norway at the time had a report from the meeting that was all lies, that was made up, saying that Stokely Carmichael had been saying that we shall kill all white people, etc. And it was
you heard that, people?
It was a real, the journalist had made it all up because the meeting had been cancelled.
Wow.
And after that we had a fallout with the newspaper, and they actually reported the meeting in Oslo relatively well afterwards. But
right.
It said a lot about how the radical part of the civil rights movement at the time was being looked upon by the European mainstream. They of course loved Martin Luther King, but they had a very different attitude to.
Yeah, I was going to get into that stuff right there, and you're going right into it. I like it. Go ahead. Yeah, because I was wondering how the Europeans at that time in that context would.
No, but I mean, this was also after Martin Luther King had got the Nobel Peace Prize. So there was a lot of sympathy for the Black movement in Europe, but there was also this kind of skepticism against the radical
movement. Yeah. Got you.
And partly against, of course, the Black
Malcolm X and
Malcolm X. But Malcolm X, the interest in Malcolm X was a bit double ambivalent also, because when he was murdered, he was also looked upon as a kind of martyr. So he also, there was an ambivalence which I think has continued afterwards.
Mm.
The relationship between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, which of course James Baldwin also wrote about, and which has been discussed in a number of recent books, among others. So this has been very much part of this. And one of the things, as far as I recall, that Stokely Carmichael was talking about in Oslo was about the interrelationship on how to interpret both Malcolm X's part of the struggle and Martin Luther King's, and trying to make a kind of attempt to reconcile the two parts. And this was, of course, very much part of what SNCC was trying to do in its work, particularly in the South, but also when they moved their campaigns north from the South. And obviously that was also very much part of the Black Panther Party, which said that the struggle is not only in the South, it's even as much in the North.
Absolutely.
And this was also after the revolts in the summer of '65. So of course this also played into the whole thing. So it was
because I know he was a part of Stokely was part of the 1961 what do they call it? They have a name for it. The 1960 the when the dealing with Martin Luther King and when he also teamed up with the guy that just died. I'm losing my names right now.
But Moses was very much part of it.
Yeah.
And then it was
the Freedom Rides, excuse me.
The Freedom Rides,
yeah.
Also the March on Montgomery, and
right.
So these were Freedom Rides, and then of course the voter registration for the election in '64,
right,
which was one of the most important actions of SNCC. It was part of what actually made SNCC was the voter registration.
And then you can see what's happening today in the States.
Yeah, well, this is a struggle that has been going on, and it has never ended. And it's
right.
It's very interesting to look upon it in this historical perspective. That many of the issues that were there back in '64 and with the Civil Rights Act, they haven't been resolved. They're still there, and that is also one of the aspects that I think is very important to look at, and that's why it's so important to see this struggle in the perspective of the long, very long march towards a proper form of Black partnership in America. It's missing, and I think it's very important what's happening now also with these new films that are coming, like the one about the Black Panthers in Chicago, the Black Jesus and Judas, and
yeah, you saw that. You saw the Judas one, huh?
Yeah,
the Messiah, Judas the Messiah with Fred Hampton. Yeah,
it was it's an excellent film.
Excellent film, right.
Also, of course, the film about the trial of the Chicago 7.
Right, the Chicago 7 on Netflix as well,
which is also part of this.
Right.
So and then this film that was made with James Baldwin, which I Am Not Your Nigger, which was of course a very important part of the whole thing.
Right.
So it's a long struggle, and I think that at least for my generation students in Norway, the meeting with Stokely Carmichael was enormously important and
huge.
Yeah.
I didn't even it didn't even dawn on me. It didn't I didn't realize that they had actually came out here to Norway until I've gotten a tip from a guy that I know, and he told me about that meeting, and he heard about knows something about your name, and that's when I reached out to you a while ago before the summer or whatever.
Mm.
Um, but no, I had a question right on the tip of my tongue earlier when you were talking about, but also on Netflix they have with Mike some new documentaries with Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali's relationship. I don't know
Yes,
if you
yes.
privy to
Yeah.
watching that. Yeah.
I mean, part of what's happening now with this kind of historical hindsights is that I think it suddenly has dawned on people that
Right.
what has been happening in the United States in the past couple of years has a long history, and a history that is very important to track backwards to what
Mm,
happened in the 60s.
right.
And that the 60s were much more important than people have sort of forgotten about what the 60s were all
Right.
about.
Right.
And so many interesting books, and also the music that came out of the 60s is a very interesting part of
And I know one of them that influenced Stokely Carmichael, Franz Fanon, the wretched book, Wretched of the Earth.
yeah,
Yeah.
Frans Fanon, yeah.
Yeah.
He
And
was
then and
incredibly important.
right.
Yes, and Frans Fanon, of course, was also part of, I think, part of the reason why Stokely Carmichael went to Africa had
Right.
had to do with his reading of Frans Fanon.
Right. Uh,
Um,
and also FBI pressure COINTELPRO.
of course, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
Being right.
the repression and attempts by the FBI to
Right.
suppress and stop this movement. I mean, we saw that in the film about Fred Hampton, of course, the way
Right.
that was there all the time,
Right.
and at the same time, which was also very important, was that in the early 60s or early mid 60s was also the start of the anti-apartheid solidarity movement in Europe.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
there was a connection between what was happening in Black America and also in the solidarity movements with South Africa at the time.
Right. Absolutely.
And then, of course, the 60s were also the decade when the African countries became independent, like Nigeria in 1960, of course, very important
Right.
symbolically, and
Right.
which is of course also why the famous tune by Sonny Rollins is called Air Regime, which is Nigeria spelled backwards.
Mm.
And so it was a very important part of a sort of black world movement, and which also then, as far as I remember, Stokely Carmichael talked about when he was in Oslo, that he didn't look upon what was happening in the United States only as something that was happening in the United States, but which was part of a world movement.
More world. Right. Because I know when he went to Africa, he really adopted a lot of these global, the
And he,
Pan-Africanism
and he,
movement.
and he married Miriam Makeba, and
Mm. Mm. No, but now your background though, how did you, when you grew up, did you, what sparked your interest to get into, or maybe Europe at the time? You know, a lot of, as you said, a lot of people were into the kind of civil rights thing, what was going on in, like, say, the
I mean,
States and
was,
in the world, and in
I,
Norway, in Norway, I don't know, but mainly you, because I'm interviewing you. What kind of sparked your interest into, yeah, like your background? What was your, you sound like you were a professor. I didn't check to see if you were you a professor at a university. I can probably tell that you.
I'm so-called emeritus professor. Uh,
Okay, got you. A
I,
little bit about your background, I guess.
well, I grew up in Oslo in
Yeah.
post-war period, which was marked by Norway being rebuilt after the German occupation. Not a very affluent society actually at the time,
Mm,
and but with a lot of political interest in the society at the time. A very important part of my youth was
Because you know, white folks in Norway is different from white folks back home in the States where I'm from, especially the South, in a way.
yeah,
But yeah. So
and
I have a lot of Americans listening in as
yeah.
well on this YouTube channel, so they're very interested in the yeah.
Well, anyway, in the 60s, early 60s, there were two major political movements, radical movements in Europe and also in Norway. One was Ban the Bomb, the movement against the atomic bomb, which was very important here, but also in UK. And then the other one was the anti-apartheid movement and the anti-colonial movement, which then moved into the movement with solidarity with Vietnam when the Vietnam War really got going. And then, of course, also with solidarity with the Algerian people in the liberation war against Algeria. And then, of course, also after the events in Southern Africa, with not only in South Africa, but also in Rhodesia, which later became Zimbabwe.
Right.
And I was involved in both these movements. And then I went to study in '64 in the United States at Brandeis University in Massachusetts. And then I came back to Norway in '66 after that, and having had an enormous enormous impressions from my stay at Brandeis, partly because it was a radical university with lots of radical students, people taking part in the freedom rides, and also
it always seems like Europeans do get a huge impact when they in the States when they go and see for themselves.
It's important, and of course the United States are many things. It's also
right.
and liberal tradition that it's very important to be aware of. And then I came back to Oslo, and then I went to study after that at School of Oriental and African Studies in London, where I studied Africanism. So I studied Africa quite a bit, and then after that I lived in several parts of Africa, several years. So
you would know this guy, I'm sure.
Yes, of course. He's a very, very close friend.
I figured that because
we went to the same school, we took the same high school, and we worked together. Yeah.
Right. I'm gonna put this up to the screen, everybody. You know, Tore Linne. If I'm butchering the name, let me know. Tore Linne Eriksson. He's written this book. He's actually. Then I would give up where I'm living. He's at I think he's still at Oslo, or is he retired professor there at Oslo Met? Or is he?
He's also a professor emeritus at Oslo Met.
Right, and he was part of the group that met Stokely and some of these Black Panther members as well, correct?
Yes.
Right.
There is a friend of mine, and a friend of Stokely Carmichael's, who moved to Denmark after having been to Oslo. His name is Dale Smith. He became a very famous blues singer in Denmark.
Wow.
And he's still there, actually. I saw him 3 years ago. He's still there.
Okay.
He might be interested to talk to as well.
Right. No, I figured that you definitely knew Tore.
Yeah. Norway is a small society.
It's a small world, absolutely. So you, and you're when you start to get into teaching, what were some of the subjects? History, government, or what were some of the?
I've been a professor of
philosophy.
No, media studies.
Okay, got you.
So I've been teaching about media and democratization process, news analysis, film studies, everything that has to do with a lot with media and politics, actually, and also international media. And that's one of the reasons why I've been working on projects with media in Africa, where I've been also part of teaching and doing research in, among others, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Mozambique.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but also I've worked quite a lot with African literature. I've written a lot on African literature over the years.
Wow. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna have to check some of those things out. You wouldn't happen to have a I wouldn't say website, but
No, I don't have a
or
website.
no, not website, but I guess you have some sort of links where they can see some of your published works.
You can go to the university, they have it all there.
All right, got you.
But I mean,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, and now we're gonna get back to that meeting with Stokely. But no, so the media, you mentioned it earlier. So you did a piece for the media way back then, correct? For like,
yeah.
right, and but
Well, I mean, we were quite skeptical, all of us, to the mainstream media, and in many ways, I still am.
yeah.
And
Ditto.
and so when we were quite upset by this false story that was in VG, which was the biggest tabloid. So we were very clear that the reports that should come out of the meeting should be as truthful as possible, and also give a good an impression of what was happening at the meeting that actually was
a true representation.
Yeah,
right.
representation of what was being said and what the discussion was all about.
Right.
There were a lot of questions and also discussions actually at the meeting. And people,
because they tend to sensationalize, hyperbole,
I mean,
and
still at that time the sensationalization has got much worse, but still at that time there was sensationalism.
Yeah.
Though I must say that afterwards, when we talked about the meeting, to us it seemed that it actually had given partly those who were at the meeting, but also a wider audience, a kind of impression of how very important and the struggle against racism in the United States was, and secondly also how important it was to come up with a more, how shall I put it, a more radical interpretation of it than the one which was being given in the sort of, how shall I say, the saintly perspectives that Martin Luther King was surrounded by. And of course, Martin Luther King was an incredibly important person, but it was also important to see this in a broader perspective. One of I must say also that when reading about Martin Luther King and looking upon his life and his work in a broader perspective, I think that his development up till when he was murdered was also a part of a radicalization that he went through, and that differences between SNCC and the SNCC people afterwards were not
as pacifist as they
much as a chasm that it was perceived as. And I think that this again had a lot also to do with the Vietnam War, that a kind of very important event that the Vietnam War was in the United States.
Yeah.
So
you haven't been given any kind of interviews as of late or anything like that through dictation or even video or anything like that? From no groups, from no African Americans or Africans or anything to ask you anything about these events with this?
Not with Stokely. I have with other things. I talked about it in other contexts, but not about Stokely. No.
Okay. No, I just find it interesting because
the first.
Yeah, the first. Hey, because you have a lot of people that talks about revolution and radical movements, and this would be the guy, to to bring up, to ask about.
But
Um,
I mean, I also thought that I tried to follow what was happening to Stokely Carmichael after he went to Africa, and
right.
in many ways, I thought it was quite a tragic history what happened to him. He sort of seemed to have lost part of his
Mm,
touch with the United States and became
mm,
sort of very isolated figure in many ways.
yeah,
Because it also had to do a lot with what was happening
I noticed that too.
in the Africa that he settled, and Guinea where he went was also became under Secretary became a very gruesome dictatorship at the end, and then of
Mm,
course all the coups that happened in West Africa after the
right.
from the 70s and upwards were not very good. I mean, it's been a quite terrible history, and it's
Right.
still happening.
Still happening there, and other places like Haiti and things like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
and of course, I also do think that as I remember, Stokely Carmichael has written about and also talked about is that his Jamaican background is important to be aware of. That he,
mm,
that he had another perspective on the United States than people growing up in the United States had. This is, of course, we can also look at that in relation to the Bob Marley and the reggae movement. And of course,
mm.
if you go to
Bob
the,
Marley tattooed on my arm. Yeah,
and
yeah.
of course, if you go to the importance of the Windrush generation in
UK. Yeah.
UK, and
Mm,
of course the enormous influence of intellectual black Jamaican-born
mm,
British intellectual like Stuart Hall had also on the interpretation of blackness and in the UK and
mm.
cultural studies in the UK. So I think that this West Indian and Jamaican background also important to keep in mind in relation
Absolutely.
to this. That's
Absolutely.
another link between Africa and America.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was born in Port of Spain, Trinidadian,
Trinidad,
born
yep,
and raised in New
yep,
York from
yep,
11.
yep.
Yeah. Um, what were some of the things that you profoundly remember about the meeting with Stokely?
Well, first of all, that he was an incredibly charismatic man, and that he had a very sort of precise and very analytical way of talking at the same time as it was very emotional. But it was, how should I put it, intellectual and emotional at the same time.
Mm,
Very rhetorical, but it was also analytical, which I
right.
think was a very much part of why he became so important in those years in the United States, because he spoke a lot of the Black American politicians and the freedom fighters, strugglers. They had learned a lot about how to speak through the churches.
Absolutely, I can concur.
Like
Yeah,
Martin Luther King,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
this is something that James Baldwin has written about the
Mm,
importance
mm,
of the black churches. So,
mm,
I mean, that is part of the rhetoric, but it's also part of the kind of utopian rhetoric that is there. We're struggling for freedom here, and we won't only have it in heaven, we'll have it here and now.
mm.
The time is now.
Right, right, right. And
So that was, of course, very different from the kind of political rhetoric that was common in Norway at the time, and which is common in Norway now, which is very low down and very sort of analytical and not
right,
fiery.
right. Now, if you had to say a difference, I just thought about this with Stokely and Malcolm X is those two. Oh, my Oh, my no, it says my battery's running low. Oh, there we go. There we go. Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X. If you had to some fundamental kind of differences you felt back then with those two, what
I
would
mean, I never experienced Malcolm X. I only saw him on
right,
film and
right,
TV.
right, right, right,
I never experienced him.
right.
It was in '64 he was murdered, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
But I of course experienced quite a few of
Or
the.
your opinion, or in your opinion,
Well, I think
about
that
those two.
in many ways, Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X belong to the same kind of ideological background. They
Pretty
were,
close, right?
but they personally they had very different backgrounds, and I think
Right.
part of this had to do with that. Malcolm X came from the United States. He
And
was
some similarities though, because Malcolm X, even though he came from the States, and he had his mother, Malcolm X's mother's from the Caribbean.
yes, that's true. But I
You
mean,
you know, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
but I mean, he had spent time in jail, and he had
Yeah, yeah,
been
yeah, yeah.
been
Absolutely, absolutely.
a crook, a small crook, etc.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
While
yeah,
Stokely Carmichael had been a student.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So their background were different, but of
yeah.
course, in their attitudes to a lot of things, they were similar.
Right,
But
right.
I do think that if you make a study of the ideological elements in those times in in um, in the Black movement in America, it belonged quite a few different uh, ideological strains, but which were uh, different in that some of them were more moderate, some of them were more radical, but they were bound together in a kind of common critique of the white racist society in the United States, and that
Mm,
goes from the very way from the, shall we call it, the more moderate part, like NAACP,
right,
to the Black Panthers. But
right.
in many ways, what they always kept together was this way of trying to combine the political arguments with also welfare politics.
Mm,
And that's a very important part of it. Some of them were very much linked to the churches, some of them were more linked to political issues, but they were part of a broad common church, so to say, which was the struggle for equality in the United States. And that struggle goes on still. I mean, it
absolutely.
hasn't ended,
Right.
and it's
Sometimes,
still very much there.
sometimes I think if it's ever gonna end.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a question.
Now,
I'm not very optimistic, but
right.
it's been a long struggle and it goes on.
Yeah. Now, how do you think you felt after, if you can go back after the meeting, or what like you and some of your colleagues or people, what did you some of the things you guys you remember how you guys felt, or how you felt, or how some of your colleagues felt,
But
whether it's Torre or some of these other guys that you kind of
I,
met up.
I think that what we were very much aware of was that what was happening with a struggle in the United States, the Black struggle in the United States, we looked upon it as very much part of a broader anti-imperialist struggle in the world. And that, of course, was linked with what was happening in South
South
Africa
Africa.
and Rhodesia, and the anti-colonial movement, but also in Algeria and Vietnam, and that this was part of a broader international
Global thing, right?
movement and linked to a broad solidarity movement, which was very much part of the late 60s and also the 70s. And then
Malcolm X did mention many times about trying to bring it, the case of racism in the states to the world court, and yeah, talked
so
plenty about that.
I
Yeah.
think that was very much the way we looked upon it, that
Yeah.
it was not only something that happened in the United States, or it happened elsewhere, and also
Absolutely.
that one had to have a look at what was happening in Europe when it came to
Mm.
Buddhism in Europe, and that still, of course, goes on.
Yeah. Now,
So,
was there any? So, was there any? Not one thing, but was there something that you can say through meetings with Stokely or Black Panthers that inspired you to this day, or that you took from it that kind of
I think that
might have changed a little
I,
bit your trajectory?
I can't sort of isolate the meeting
Yeah.
with
No,
Carmichael,
I know. It's
but
so many years ago, and yeah.
well, that's partly it, but also with so many impressions and so much of my reading.
Right.
Also, when I was in the United States and studied there, but also when I've been back, and also with my work.
You met countless people, and you went to Africa and so many things. That's why it's hard to
As part of it,
isolate it.
no, I can't say look upon it in isolation, but I still think that it's very important to see how racist the United States still is, and
Mm.
that this is something that has dawned on the world again
Tell me about it, sir.
after what happened in the past 2 years.
Yeah.
So I think that is. I have been saying this many times, that United States is an ingrained racist society,
Absolutely.
and,
Absolutely.
and that that's important to be aware of it, and that the struggle still goes on, and I feel that it's not over yet,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
But and also that it's very much part of a structural makeup of the American society, and this structural makeup is not something that can be sort of whitewashed away. It has to do with the profound changes have to be made, but and
Right.
those profound changes were actually brought up very much in the early 60s and mid 60s, I think, and that was very much what the struggle then was about.
Right.
It hasn't gone away, still there.
And that leads me to the question, in your opinion, and from what you see across the pond, and what you gather, do you believe since that time in the U.S. or the world, race relations has gotten worse, better, or the same?
Well, they've changed. I mean,
Yeah.
it depends what you mean by better or worse. I mean, I think there is much more awareness of it,
Mm,
which I think is a very positive
mm.
development. I also think there is
Technology, by technology and certain. Yeah.
well, there is much more awareness of that of racist structures, and I
Right. Yeah.
also
Yeah.
think there is more of many more attempts to see it and then do something about it, and that some of it is superficial, but quite a lot of it's also structural,
Mm.
and it's also something that is different from country to country or from society to
Mm.
society, and you cannot say.
I like how you said some of it's superficial. That's correct. But yeah, go ahead.
But then of course symbolic changes are also changes, even if
True.
they're symbolic,
Yeah. True that. True that.
and
Because you got a lot of talk about reparations and things like that
well,
for.
I think that reparations is an important element of it, and I think it's bringing back of African art back to Africa from European museums is an important part of it.
Absolutely.
I think the interest which has been happening in the world of art and literature in Black literature from America, but also African literature is a very important part of this. I think the films that we have been talking about is part of this, what you could
Right.
symbolic
Right.
awareness coming up.
Like
So
even the we didn't mention the Black Panther movie that kids watched and you bring yeah that is one of them. But long line, a bunch of these movies. Yeah.
there are lots of them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think that, and then this 5-part film that was made by this black British filmmaker McQueen.
Exterminate the Brutes. No,
No,
not that one.
that's another film made
Yeah.
by Raoul Walsh, who was the one who made a film about.
With Baldwin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, it's a 5-part film about West Indian life in London from the 60s and up till today, and it's fantastic television
Okay.
series.
I might have slipped. That one might have slipped past me. I'm gonna throw one back at you. Have you checked out on Netflix? Is a very good series called High on the Hog.
No, I haven't seen that.
That is really good because it has that connection with the foodways, African foodways in in Africa, in America as well. How it's it's connected, and what we eat and we're used to eating. Like
soul food.
Yeah, there you go, there you go. Because my mother's side of the family being from New Orleans,
Yeah.
and things like that. So when I ate gumbo and the okra, I never knew until later that it was connected to Africa and things like that, and such. Right. So we're gonna. It says we had 10 minutes max, and I told you I was gonna keep it within an hour, and that's good. So and I can't let you go without asking you, because everything we targeted was America for the most part, in the world globally. But I'm gonna have to ask you about your opinion on the race relations in Norway, in your opinion.
Well, I think that Norway is much more. It's also a racist country because all countries in some way are racist. But I mean, it's not racist in the way that it's the evil racist society, but there are racist elements in the Norwegian society, and it's of course something that. But there is also an awareness of it, which is very important.
Right.
And this awareness, and there is a struggle which goes on both on official level and among people in Norway, that this is not something that we want. And if you look at the changes in Norwegian societies from when we talked in the 60s and up till to now, of course, it's also the diversity of Norwegian society, which used to be very, very homogeneous. Now it's very heterogeneous, and I think that's a very important part of Norway. It's a good part of Norway.
Right.
And I
No, don't get me wrong. I want for the followers to hear, and I didn't mean to cut you off, sir. But when I asked him about racism, and he admits that there is, and I believe that. So it's still a difference when you're in America, especially in the South, talking around a group of white people, and you come to Norway. It's a major difference. I'm gonna tell you that. Still.
And I think there are differences between people's background, or the different people's background in Norway, and how they're also met and treated. I think that is also part of it. So Norway has become a much more heterogeneous society, much more of a multicultural society, and I think that's very good. I still think that there is structural racism in Norway.
Absolutely.
Immigrant people tend to be poorer than the majority, but and that's. I don't think that's so much race as it is part of also a class element, and I think
they always hear about you hear about it a little bit differently here in Norway. Like you said, what you said, and also the religion element of it.
Well, I mean the question of Islam is of course very important here.
In Norway's context, for sure.
And it is being part of a reaction against Islam, and I think that's a bit different from racism as such. I think critique of religion is an important element of a necessary critique.
I do too, by the way. As I post, I'm not Muslim.
I
Yeah,
think this is that there is racism in
right,
any society.
right.
There is racism also. There is something called black racism in parts of Africa, definitely.
And that's another subject, but absolutely. There.
This is something that we have to confront, and I think that it is being confronted in Norway. Not
Right.
necessarily enough of it, but it is being confronted. I wouldn't say that there is this ingrown historical racism in Norway that you'll find in the United
Like in the U.S., correct. In
or,
one. Mm,
or for that matter of fact, in the UK or in France. I think that also has a lot to do with colonial pasts.
mm.
In Norway, I think there's much more an awareness of this than in.
Mm. And I must say, being an African American, when I first came to Norway, it's funny because you know about some, like you said, fiery, strong talking African Americans about being black and this and that. And then when you come over here and then and then you ask a Norwegian if they've been to Africa, they say, yeah. Even the most, common person, they've been here and here and here. And then you find out if I ever, or you, the African American, ever been to Africa, for the most part, a lot of them haven't.
No, of course, but I mean,
I mean, things are changing now, but
yeah,
I'm saying, like me, I personally, I've never stepped foot on the continent of Africa, but yet and I find myself when I'm coming so strong when it comes to racism that I recognize or things like that, or people from America, that when we talk about racism and things like that, it's funny when we talk to Norwegians, where a lot of them, majority of them, have been to Africa several times.
but
Yeah.
part of this is that you're probably perceived as being first and foremost an American and then a black American.
Yeah.
I think there is a difference between the way that people in Norway perceive black Americans. They are being perceived first of all
Mm,
almost as Americans, then as black Americans,
mm,
while people from Africa are being perceived as Africans.
right, right.
And then I also think there is a difference between the way people are being perceived when they come from Asia and Africa, etc. And I think that is part of the problem, but it's also very much part of the beauty.
Mm,
We are different, and we have to be aware of that. And difference is not bad.
right, right.
Difference is good.
So okay, so lastly, what's your take on the last, if have you followed the politics now in here in Norway, the last bit?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, of course. I had to ask. I knew. But so are they moving to the right, the left, more, you
Well,
see it more?
I mean, the new government is going to be the left,
Right.
to the left of the former one.
Right, because
But
it's the guy from the Arbeiders Party, and that's a bit
The Labour
the
Party,
Labor Party. Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
Jonas Gahr Støre, he will be prime minister, but in which form of coalition? But
But isn't it every kind of like in the States, you have some Republicans, and then the next four, then the it's like it's like a seesaw, So now it's more on the liberal.
I mean, the Republicans are way to the right of anything
Yeah,
in Norway.
I know that. True. That's way to the right. Then yeah, absolutely.
The liberal part of the Democratic Party is the Conservative Party in Norway.
True.
I mean, you can't make the comparison
That's
between
true. That's true.
political attitudes. I mean,
And you see, Americans that are listening, or anybody, I've been trying to say it's
I mean, every political party in Norway is in favor of socialized medicine.
Hear that?
So
Hear that?
even the most right-wing ones. I mean, this is it's there is equality when it comes to things like that. So, well, I mean, I think that
Americans are a breed of their own.
I think one of the most difficult parts of what's happening in the world today is the ignorance of many Americans when it comes to the world.
Mm.
I'm sorry to say, but
Hey, keep it honest, keep it real. We say, yeah. I like it.
anyway,
Yeah. Well, anyway, it looked like we were at the end of our time, and I appreciate it. Yeah, the time that you given me, I was reaching out, trying to reach out and touch you, and I'm glad that we finally made it happen after the summer. And stay well and everything during this time. Oh yeah, and then Norway just opened up, so everybody's getting hysterical.
Yeah, well, it's
Ugh, yeah, yeah.
Where do you live in Oslo?
Right next door to Oslo Met.
Sankthans 7.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that means you're right around the corner from me, right?
No,
No. Okay.
I'm out in the suburbs.
Okay. Got you. On the west side somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, sir.
Take care.
All right,
Maybe
you too.
we'll meet each other.
Absolutely, a coffee.
Yeah,
I learned to like coffee since I've been in Norway.
it would be nice. Okay.
Yeah. You too.
Take care. Thank
All
you.
right. Take care, sir. All right. Bye-bye. See. Now.
Okay.